Okay, stop for a second. I want you to picture something. You're standing at 14,000 feet above sea level. The air is thin. It's freezing cold. The ground is basically rock and dust. There's no river nearby, no lake, no rain. Not for the next 6 months. And somehow, there's a green, thriving farm right in front of you. Crops, animals, people, living, thriving. How? Because 1,000 years ago, someone solved one of the hardest engineering problems on the planet. Not with computers, not with satellites, not with a single drop of modern technology, with stone, and an almost supernatural understanding of how water moves through a mountain. And here's the thing that should genuinely bother you. We almost completely forgot they did it. Now, most people, when they think about ancient South America, they think Machu Picchu. They think the Inca. And the Inca were incredible, don't get me wrong. But here's what your history class didn't tell you. The Inca weren't first. Before them, centuries before them, there were civilizations living in the high Andes that figured out something so sophisticated, so precise, that modern hydrologists are literally studying it right now to solve today's water crisis. These weren't primitive people scratching at dirt. These were engineers. And their greatest invention? Something called an Amuna. Never heard of it? That's exactly the problem. Here's the challenge these people were dealing with. The Andes, specifically the high plateaus around what is now Peru and Bolivia, they have a brutal climate split. Wet season, dry season. During the wet season, water is everywhere. Glaciers melt, rain pours down, rivers overflow. For a few months, you almost can't avoid it. Then the dry season hits, and it hits hard. 6 months, sometimes more, basically zero rainfall. The rivers shrink, the glaciers stop melting as fast. And if you haven't prepared, your crops die, your animals die, you die. This is not a manageable inconvenience. This is an existential problem every single year, guaranteed. So what do? The obvious answer is store the water, build a reservoir, catch the rain when it comes. And that's what most ancient civilizations did. Tanks, cisterns, buckets essentially, but made of stone. But here's the thing about a cistern. It holds water on the surface. And in the Andean highlands, surface water does something inconvenient. It evaporates. It freezes. It's exposed to the sun and wind at high altitude, which is brutal. You store 1,000 gallons. You lose a massive percentage before you ever use it. The pre-Inca engineers looked at that problem, and instead of solving it with bigger buckets, they did something completely different. They decided to store the water inside the mountain. This is where it gets genuinely mind-blowing, so stay with me. An Amuna, the plural is Amunas, is essentially a stone-lined canal, but not the kind you're imagining, not a channel that carries water from point A to point B on the surface. An Amuna is designed to slow water down, deliberately, carefully, strategically. Here's how it works. During the wet season, when glacial runoff is pouring down the mountainside, the Amunas intercept that water at high elevation. They redirect it through a network of carved stone channels across the hillside at a very gentle, very specific angle, not steep enough to let the water rush through quickly. Slow enough that as the water travels, it seeps. It percolates down through the soil, down through the rock, down into the natural aquifers, the underground water reservoirs that sit inside the mountain. Basically, they were recharging the groundwater. They were taking surface water that would have rushed down the mountain and disappeared, and they were injecting it into the mountain's own internal storage system, which then, slowly, steadily, over weeks and months, fed springs lower on the slope. Months later, during the dry season, when the rains were completely gone and the surface was baked and cracked, those springs would still be flowing because the mountain was releasing the water it had stored on a delay, like a natural battery, but for water. These people didn't build bigger buckets. They turned an entire mountain into a reservoir. Now, here's the detail that I keep coming back to, because it tells you everything about how sophisticated this actually was. The angle matters enormously. If the Amuna channel is too steep, the water moves too fast, doesn't have time to soak in, and just runs off. Useless. If it's too flat, the water pools, stagnates, and creates disease. Deadly. The engineers who built these things had to find the exact right gradient across mountainous, unpredictable terrain, without levels, without surveying equipment, without any of the tools we would consider basic today. And they got it right, consistently, across dozens of systems, at altitudes where the air is so thin that just walking is hard. The Lima-based NGO that has been working to restore ancient Amunas, Aquafondo, they brought in modern hydrologists to evaluate the engineering. The conclusion? The original builders understood the subsurface geology of their specific mountains at a level that is, quote, remarkable. These weren't guesses. This was accumulated, precise, tested knowledge, passed down across generations. And then it was lost. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, gradually. The Spanish arrived in the 1500s. Existing social structures were dismantled. The communities that maintained the Amunas were disrupted. The knowledge that had been passed down orally, practically, through lived experience, it started breaking down. Some Amunas fell into disrepair. Some were actively abandoned. The people who knew how to read the mountain, who understood the system, that knowledge didn't get written down in a form that survived. By the 20th century, many of these systems were just ruins, overgrown with grass, unrecognized, invisible. Lima today is one of the most water-stressed major cities on the planet. It sits in a desert, 8 to 10 million people. And for decades, the solution everyone reached for was modern infrastructure. Pipes, pumps, reservoirs, treatment plants. Expensive, energy-intensive, dependent on continuous maintenance and continuous investment. And then someone looked up at the mountains and started asking questions about those old stone channels. Here's where the story gets genuinely exciting. Starting in the 2000s, researchers, local communities, and NGOs began actively restoring Amunas in the hills above Lima, not as historical preservation, as functional infrastructure. And it worked. The restored Amunas began doing exactly what they were designed to do 1,000 years ago, intercepting highland runoff, recharging groundwater, feeding springs during the dry season. Communities downstream that had been experiencing water shortages started seeing improved dry season flows. One study found that a restored Amuna system could delay water flow by anywhere from 1 to 2 months, meaning water that fell as rain during the wet season was still emerging from springs well into the dry season. That's not magic. That's the engineering working exactly as intended. And the cost comparison is staggering. Modern infrastructure solutions for water storage in Lima, pipes, concrete, pumps, cost orders of magnitude more per liter stored than a restored Amuna system. The ancient approach is cheaper, lower maintenance, uses zero energy, and works with the natural hydrology of the mountain rather than fighting it. The mountain already knows how to store water. The Amunas just give it a little help. Now, let's be honest about something, because I don't want this to sound like a fairy tale with a perfect ending. Restoring Amunas is not effortless. The knowledge of exactly where to place them, exactly what angle, exactly which geological formations allow for the best percolation, that knowledge was partially lost. Modern restoration projects have to combine whatever archaeological evidence remains with contemporary hydrology to reconstruct what the original builders understood intuitively. Some restored systems have worked better than expected. Some have underperformed. And there's a scale question. Lima has millions of people. A network of ancient stone channels, even a large network, cannot by itself solve a megacity's water needs. This is not an either/or situation. Modern infrastructure still matters. The Amunas aren't a complete replacement. But here's what they are. They're proof. Proof that a pre-industrial civilization, working with stone and observation and accumulated knowledge, developed a passive, renewable, scalable water management system so effective that modern engineers are reverse engineering it in the 21st century. That's not a historical footnote. That's a lesson. So here's the question I want to leave you with. We live in a world where water scarcity is one of the most pressing crises of this century. 2 billion people already live in water-stressed regions. Climate change is making wet seasons wetter and dry seasons drier, exactly the kind of extremes the Andean highlands already dealt with. Good problem these ancient engineers solved? The whole world is about to have it. And the most cutting-edge answer we keep reaching for is build more expensive infrastructure, use more energy, engineer our way out with modern technology. Meanwhile, somewhere on a Peruvian hillside, there's a stone channel that's been quietly doing the same job for 1,000 years. We didn't lose the solution to the water crisis. We forgot we already had it. The pre-Inca engineers didn't leave us monuments. They left us instructions. We just stopped reading them.